My name is Marc-Andre Pigeon. I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives. Before we begin today's conversation, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. For those of us who are here in Saskatoon, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are settlers on Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis Nation. And we are, as such, we are grateful for the land, the water, the skies, and this treaty's original inhabitants. May we be good neighbors to one another, good stewards of this land, and good ancestors to all our grandchildren. So with that, I'm going to just say a few words on our format for today, because this is only our second brown bag conversation. I just want to lay a bit of the groundwork. This conversation series emerged as the result of a suggestion from one of the members of our advisory committee at the center. And they were lamenting this fact that in our COVID era, there are few really good opportunities for people to who work in the cooperative and credit union communities or adjacent to those communities to get to know one another on a kind of more informal basis. So while our brown bag conversation series is structured around a chat with some invited guests, it's much more about creating a space for informal conversations, because these are really the tissues that stitch us together in the cooperative sector and beyond. And I think they're vitally important in that sense to our sense of well-being, and I might say by extension to the potential for cooperatives, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, I'm going to ask my co-host Jen Budney to say a few words about herself, and then I'll briefly introduce our speakers, and we'll get going. Jen.
Hey everyone, I am Jen Budney. I work with Marc-Andre Pigeon at the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives. And actually, I've just, the timing for this brown bag couldn't be better. I just finished earlier this week a 6-week governance course that I was teaching through Cooperatives First, called Good Governance Matters. So this is just one of the several collaborations we've had with Cooperatives First over the years. And I don't know if I know any of you from that course, but the participants were all folks from the cooperative and credit union sector across the entire country, actually. And it was just fabulous. So I'm super excited to hear this talk today and chatting with you all afterwards.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Really quickly, before I introduce our speakers, the way things are going to roll today is our speakers are going to say a few words. They're going to kind of introduce their topic. Then Jen and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation, maybe 10 minutes. Then we're going to have breakouts. We're going to break out the attendees into groups of 3 or 4, and we're going to ask you a question to kind of reflect on and have a conversation. Those breakouts are really meant to get to know people, basically, and of course to talk about the issue at hand, but more importantly to kind of build some of those networks I mentioned a moment ago. So that's the kind of way we're going to play this. So if you can hold your questions, and if you have questions, kind of bring them up in your discussion forums, and then when we reconvene, that'll be an opportunity to kind of have a more general conversation with the whole group. So that's how we're going to proceed. And to help us in that conversation today, we have Audra Kruger, who is the Executive Director of Co-ops First and an alumni of the Center for the Study of Cooperatives. And we have Sheldon Stenner, who is the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Federated Cooperatives Limited, and also the Chair of the Board at Cooperative First. So we have the right people for this conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to you two to kick us off.
Well, thanks, Marc-Andre. Thanks, Jen. And it's a real privilege to be invited to share today at this second brown bag lunch. So yeah, I mean, I've been on the board of Co-ops First for about 3 years now, and it's been my pleasure to be assigned this responsibility as part of my job. Vic Heward was on prior to that, and he and his ilk, and I believe Glenn Tully, Scott Banda, all kind of were instrumental in kicking this off a number of years ago. So I thought I'd just start by just talking a little bit about how Co-ops First came about, what got us here today, and then Audra will take it into a little bit more of a discussion about what it's up to and some of the successes and challenges and changes that we've had. So Co-ops First came out of research. Federated Cooperatives identified in 2013, 2012 that there was a gap. We sensed, we intuited that there was a gap in terms of co-op knowledge out there, and basically the question that that was put to the Center for the Study of Co-op and the Co-op Innovation Project were two. Is the co-op model feasible in rural and Indigenous communities in Western Canada still? Is it still matters? Is it still relevant? Can it still be something used? And if so, how does one inspire those communities? What's required to do that? And so FCL funded a 2-year project of research that involved the Plunkett Foundation from the UK, the Center for Study Co-ops, among others. And they set about to do a very deep dive into what the climate was. And one of the interesting stories that or pieces that I like to think about, it gives me a little perspective. I think it came from Scott Banda, our CEO, was back in the day, every town had a co-op, had a wheat pool, and had a credit union. So there were 3 institutions in each small town across rural Saskatchewan, rural Manitoba, Alberta, BC, that were able to foster an understanding of what a co-op was. And those folks, everybody was very connected in their community. And as population shifted to urban centers, a bit of that is lost, obviously. And as some of those have closed down in the rural communities, some of that connection is lost. So we kind of thought, well, there's our sense is maybe people don't understand what it is, and how can we help that? We believe in the model, and we think there's still room for it. And the research came back and said yes. It said yes, there still is to both questions. It's still feasible in rural Indigenous communities and small communities in Saskatchewan, and so there's still a room for co-op development and activity at the local level. And how do you do it? And the model, they set out a model, I think, with Plunkett to talk about inspire, exploring, creating, thrive, and connect. Kind of those principles to get it going out there and to do that. And so and we look at what's needed in those towns. It's a business capacity. You got to find the folks that are able to lead, identifying those leaders in the community. Social capacity, you have to have shared goals. It has to be more than a couple of people, and there has to be a well-defined need not being met in those communities, and then knowledge of the co-op model. And so knowledge of the co-op model, we think, had skipped a couple generations. And so FCL then decided to fund and start a nonprofit, which was Cooperatives First, to basically provide the services and the connection and the expertise across Western Canada. And it was very important for us because we have a Western Canadian footprint, that we take a pan-Western Canadian approach. And the best model to do that was to create our own nonprofit about that, to talk to those Indigenous and rural communities and to help meet their needs. And so, like any startup, there was fits and starts, but not very many. I mean, we at Federated Co-op, we made an initial $5 million 5-year commitment to Co-ops First, and we're at the end of that. And now we have a $1 million a year commitment that rotates through. So there's, at any one time, there's a couple of years of commitment to make sure that they can focus on what's important. And I'm as the representative from Federated, and I'm now the board chair. My role is to be that link between our sustainability committee and board and the co-op retailing system, and the work that Cooperatives First is doing. And one of the things that we identified fairly early was that we didn't want them, the nonprofit, to be focused on or worrying about financing and funding. And so I think one of the things that I'm proudest of in terms of success we've seen in the first 5 years of the organization that they've had is because they've been able to focus on the thing we want them to do, and not be worrying about funding and finding revenue and funders. Anyways, I mean, and under the leadership of Audra Kruger, and she's assembled a great team. They've had some amazing successes, and every year it's just a year of wow when I get to present to our FCL board about some of the accomplishments and what they've achieved with a small but mighty group. So with that, I'll turn it over to Audra.
Great, thanks, Sheldon. And also, I'm here, but as Sheldon said, there's a team beside me and along me, both in the office, at home. But I also had the pleasure of seeing a a number of people on the call who are past board members and are inspirations to us every day on this journey that we've been undertaking for the last few years. We've started in 2016 with a very ambitious goal, and it was really a pleasure to have a clear mandate and mission that was laid out by the CIP project, the Cooperative Innovation Project. As Sheldon said, it was a very ambitious 2-year study that the center undertook under the leadership of Murray Fulton and Dion Polar. And it had a clear objective. It was looking for what is the state of affairs. There's a number of discussions happening here, probably in a lot of co-op boards and among sort of the cooperative ecosystem. Where are we with understanding what a co-op is, and where are they relevant? Do they make sense? And what are the barriers? So we were created with a very clear mandate. And I talk about it as in 2 big buckets. One around the co-op education, and Jen touched upon the fact that we do a lot of work around governance, and that's a pleasure. And then the other big bucket is we do work with groups on developing their co-op. And I was listening to you talk about the Plunkett Foundation. They're an organization in the UK that had been doing it for many, many years and had developed a view and sort of a strategy. And I think of where we're at right now, and we're very different, obviously, because Western Canada is unique and each group that we work with is unique. So when we think about how we work with the groups, what we do off the hop is really listen to what they are trying to achieve and ask good questions. So we try, as sort of our theory of support, is to first listen and ask good questions back to help the group find clarity of purpose. Because generally the groups know what they're trying to solve, what problem they are trying to solve, or what opportunity they see. They know best. So it's our job to think about some of those barriers that were identified in the CIP research and try to remove them. So we try to take out any kind of friction that may or may not be happening, within the group, or when the group bumps into the sort of formalization of their group. Because a lot of these groups have been existing and doing their thing cooperatively for quite some time, and they feel that it's the right time to incorporate and become sort of legitimate in the eyes of government. And so we help with that. And so, as Sheldon said, we are just gathering all the data to present on the last year. And when we looked back, we've had hundreds or thousands of students go through our courses along with the Center for the Study of Cooperative. And we've had numerous groups come to us. We've had 146 cooperative projects since 2016. And we've had 57 cooperatives incorporated since 2016. And this year we're looking at about 15 new co-ops, and we'll see how we do for the rest of the year. But that's where we're at. And we've got big plans to carry on. One of the things that the pandemic taught us, and we were already going that way, is the need to involve technology. Like Sheldon said, that there were a pool and a co-op and a credit union in every town. Those things may or may not be there. They're probably not there. Where are people? They're online. So we really doubled down on our online offerings in order to engage and meet people. And so in that, the one thing that sort of I realized this last couple of years is that there is an absolute essential piece to this, which is thinking about the audience and who are you trying to speak to. And so we put a lot of work with all of our content, and we create a lot of content about who is this for. So everything that's written, everything that's put out, there is someone that we're trying to speak to. And I don't know if we did that so much at the beginning because we're just trying to talk about co-ops to whoever would listen, but we sat back and thought, who needs to hear this message and to what end? Why are we doing this and what for? So that's been a real focus for the last 2 years, as we've had the pandemic in a way, a terrible thing, but a gift, because it allowed us time to focus and really prioritize our messaging and think about what are we doing and who are we doing it for. So that's where we're at right now, is really trying to refine our messaging and speak in relevant modern language to audiences that haven't been spoken to or haven't been reached out to before, particularly Indigenous audiences. And anyone that's been paying attention to what's going on in the world realize that this is not just a cooperative shortcoming, it's a societal shortcoming where we have not reached out to Indigenous communities and folks. And so we're really trying to do that as well. But I think I covered the things, but well, I'll hand it back to you, Jen.
Thank you. I wanted to actually just take this second to make a plug for a book and a book chapter. You mentioned Dion Poehler. She is at the Edwards School of Business now, but she's also the CRS chair in cooperative retailing for the center. And she and a colleague from University of Alberta have put together a book called Building Inclusive Communities in Rural Canada. It's coming out, I think, early in the new year from University of Alberta Press, and it will be open access, I understand. And there's a chapter in this book that has been co-authored by Dion with a whole crew of us from the center and from Cooperatives First. And the chapter is called Cooperative Development Possibilities in Rural, Settler, and Indigenous Communities, Lessons from the Cooperative Innovation Project and Cooperatives First. So there's a lot more information in there on the research project that led to the development of Cooperatives First, and some of the challenges and successes that Coops First has experienced in the first few years of operations. But I want to thank you both for that. My question is, when you got the results back from this initial study, were you surprised at how little knowledge there was on the cooperative model out there? And what did you make of it? And now that FCL is doing something through supporting Cooperatives First, what do you have ideas for what else other cooperatives and credit unions might do to improve the general understanding of the cooperative model, which you say, Sheldon, has skipped a couple generations?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what was identified early on was we were on the right track. Our spidey senses were accurate. That there was a knowledge missing, and so the next step was to take the next step to create the mechanism to help it. And we also recognized early on that it's not an overnight thing. This is going to take a while. I mean, even with the extraordinary success of 57 new co-ops, that's and reaching these people, it still takes a bit of time to do that. One of the interesting things that Audra's group does is worked with economic development people. I think one of the big gaps is amongst, I'll speak for lawyers for sure. There's not many that work in this area in legal stuff. And so if you show up and even if you think you want to do a co-op with your group and you go to your law office, your law firm, they're probably going to steer you to a different mechanism because they're not familiar with it. Audra's group has established the tools for incorporation and to help walk through those processes. And again, it speaks to meeting them where they are. So it's very direct in terms of the direct help to identify the groups that we can work with and help along and what do they need and meeting them where they are. And also then the longer term benefit is more and more people are getting an understanding of what a co-op is and how it works and being more plugged into that need. And frankly, if a group comes and a co-op's not right for them, that's not where we steer them. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there wasn't surprises. It's not disappointing, but I think the big area for us is when we focused on rural and Indigenous communities. I think that's not the easiest. That's the place where the need is still there and you can still make the contacts. I mean, certainly as a board, Cooperatives First, we've talked about what's next. Like where do we, there's not pressure, but there's some call to move into urban areas, into that and where do you do that? But we've been very careful to try and avoid mission creep and make sure that we're being successful in what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So that actually, Audra, you at Cooperatives First, you established a course for federal public servants, didn't you? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So we have a learning management system. So it's our own platform, which we're very proud of. And we saw that there's a need for us to have control and ownership over a platform that we could be really responsive and nimble and get content out there that just very specific audiences. So we have undertaken this project with the federal government. It was part of their commitment in the Year of the Cooperative to that and to honor that. So it's just recently been launched And I think, people are starting to go through it and such, but it's very much in keeping with how we like to present things in a very pragmatic and straightforward way with really accessible content. And so we've had great feedback and a great experience with working with the federal government. And picking up on what Sheldon said about the economic development set, we recognize too that we are we are well resourced and very well equipped by FCL and the CRS, but Western Canada is enormous, and getting out into rural areas is really challenging. So we've spent a lot of time, again, thinking about the audiences. A strategy for us was to work with the people working on economic development projects and those kinds of things. So there's a whole ecosystem out there, and having varying levels of knowledge of the co-op model. So there's these heartwarming examples and stories of people working that we've taken our courses. Kyle does a Creating Connections course that is again tailored to a very specific audience, which is people working on economic development and rural communities. So them in their office, a group comes in, well, they probably call, and the person saying, hey, that sounds like a co-op to me. So what we've tried to do is get that knowledge out there on to people making decisions and leadership as well. I'm trying to connect in with Indigenous leadership to make sure that they know who we are and start to build that relationship. And so there's very specific strategies like that that's taken place, and really acknowledging the massive investment that Federated and other large co-ops have made in this. They're aware that this is a competitive advantage and that more people need to know that and understand that. And what better way than to have a very deep and personal experience creating a co-op that's going to solve a local issue. And so sort of a deep understanding of where and when a co-op work. We've got lots of stories like that. And, we're working with, I think we've had 146 cooperative projects since 2016. So the demand is there. When people realize what it is, they're interested and they want to partake. They want to have control over their destiny. They want to have local solutions. They're reflecting back at some of these large systems and seeing the failings that are happening. COVID has made that very apparent, and they're responding. They're having local responses to that, and it's a really wonderful thing to see, and it's a pleasure. Lots of inspiring people we get to work with.
Thank you. Marc-Andre, you had a question, I think.
Yeah. I want to pick up a bit on what Sheldon was talking about, and talked about the legal community, and Audra talked about some of the policy community. But I'm interested more largely about the policy community, and maybe Sheldon, you have a lot of direct experience in this space. What are you seeing there? I was just speaking to people in Quebec. These the forest cooperatives, and they were actually seeded or incentivized strongly by the government back in the 80s, and there's dozens of them, right? So, the government in Quebec has played a big role in nurturing their cooperative sector. Do you see any similar appetite here in Saskatchewan or in Western Canada generally? Where do you see policymakers at more generally around the cooperative sector?
Well, I mean, what we've seen in the last decade or two is actually going the other way. I mean, I think Quebec, from what I've understood, is a kind of its own infrastructure. I mean, very strong support for co-ops there, very deeply entrenched, and it would be lovely to get back there and then get that support again for governments. But I think what we've seen is governments going the other way, and still a long way to go in terms of having the policymakers understand what we are. And I mean, we're working towards that all the time. And I know Federated has a government relations, and it's a constant effort to try and have them understand what we are, and why we're different and why we matter. So yeah, we're not seeing the support from policymakers in terms of certainly nothing like that. In fact, it's funny, got a document last week. A number of retails of our members reached out to me last week because they got a questionnaire from the Alberta government that they're opening up their act, their Co-op Act. They've already done their Business Corporations Act, they've done their Nonprofit Corporation Act, and now they want to do their spin through the Co-op Act. And it was all okay except for one thing that said, well, just like the other acts, we want to encourage investment from outside, so we want to open up to and change so you don't have to be a resident Albertan to be a board on a co-op. And I kind of step back and go, well, there's a situation where it's not all the same. It's apples and oranges, and there's not, you don't need somebody overseas investing in your co-op in Tabor, Alberta, or directing it. I mean, they're just totally misunderstanding and misapprehending. So what a co-op is about, and the local nature of it, and the local governance structure. So there's still room to go on that in terms of where we're at. I mean, again, I think it reflects what the SIP study showed, is that we've kind of lost that.
Right. Right. Maybe just a quick follow-up, and maybe a little bit more to Audrey. When I was looking at the chapter Jen referenced earlier in the forthcoming book, it showed there have been 30 to 50 co-ops from a period of 2000 to 2015. So 15 years, and you've kind of hit that mark in 6 years, right? And so that's pretty remarkable. What do you think's going on there? Is that a demand, and notwithstanding the challenges that Sheldon just identified, what's going on there? Is it all demand, or is it partly the supply is better? What do you see happening there?
Well, there's a couple of things happening there. I'm glad we can come back to this, because I want to talk about, again, the SIP project and those barriers that were identified. And, I have personal experience in this too, way back when, as part of a group that was trying to get a car share off the ground. And there was a group that had been working on it for years and had done a lot of work, market analysis, etc. And it fell apart. They were on the cusp of doing the incorporation. They got the documents and hit a barrier. It really is a barrier for the, even the most highly equipped group. You would think it just seems like it's too much for a lot of groups. So, I would say the short answer is we exist now. And so we get to the right people with the right messaging, with the right tools, and we equip them, or we have an incorporation product, so we do it for them. And so that takes away a huge barrier. It also, the fact that we have the sort of the mechanism and the tools and the people here. If a person is thinking about, okay, we're gonna come together, we're gonna create this business or service, we can be a nonprofit, we can be some other kind of business model, and they start talking to us, and it makes sense for a cooperative, and we're gonna help them. They're gonna go with a co-op, because we're here to assist them and walk them through it and ask them really great questions and make sure that they're focused on the membership. Who are the members? And why are you doing this? And what is it? So we ask pretty simple questions and get them going on the right direction, and try to equip them along the way. So, I would think the fact that Federated and CRS, looked at that data and saw it's not great out there for co-op development. This isn't a good thing. Looking 20 or 30 years down the road, we need a generational project, which is Cooperatives First, and trying to re-embed that co-op DNA across Western Canada and reach out to new audiences. So we've had conversations here about trying to get that message about how to collaborate, because with the pandemic and others, and millennials and Indigenous people, they want to work together on solutions, positive solutions. And so getting in front of those people who don't even know what a co-op is or haven't even thought about it, but there's this general idea that they want to collaborate, we're trying to get in front of them. So really early entry into their heads. And when looking back at some of our results from last year, we've had over 100,000 hits on our website, and it comes from us really focusing on trying to speak to as many people as possible. But we've identified the audiences, and we're trying to drop those messages in there. And we've reached over 1 million through our social media platforms as well. And this comes from a significant investment and trying to figure out what those audiences are. So our message is getting out there, and we are driving people to us.
Oh, if I could just link on to that, Marc-Andre, about the government thing. It was funny, we met with the Registrar of Co-ops in Saskatchewan here, and they're stuck because they used to have resources that they could send people to who could help explain it, and those are gone. And so they were really excited to hear about Cooperatives First, and they have somewhere where they can send them, because they hate not helping, but it's not their mandate to be able to give them advice. Here's the forms, here you file them, but they couldn't really advise them. And so having another resource to send them to was really a great thing for them.
That's great. I'm going to turn it to Jen for one last quick question, then we're going to do our breakout. So Jen, do you have a quick question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hopefully it's quick. So with all of this travel and work that you've done over the last 5 years, are there particular communities or sectors that you see are particularly ripe for cooperative development? And if it's not, if it's more generalized, can you highlight a few, give us some examples of the range of kinds of co-ops that you have helped to incorporate?
Yeah, so really interesting question. And it's one of those ones that I've been asked from time to time and have trouble answering, because the innovation out there is amazing to me. And so it's not necessarily a sector thing, it's a sort of a group response to their problem. So we've had a very diverse set of co-ops emerge, and things that we wouldn't have ever imagined. So, one of the more recent ones, and those are going to be in my head, is, we've had groups of midwives, 2 different ones, come to us because they want to find a way to work together that's, transparent and open and collective and fits with their values and the way they want to work together. And we've had also a really interesting one of, newspaper publishers across the prairies, where the publisher is looking to, what's next? I'm going to retire. I need to hand this thing off. It's a really important piece of communication and infrastructure in those communities, and it shouldn't go away. Yet he sees that he wants to step down and step away from it. So he's looking for a way to hand off. We've also had cannabis retailers and producers come to us, and they're going to take on the big boys, like they're taking on the big players, and they see market concentration from big firms out in the East, and they want to create options for consumers and their members. And so they want to gain market share with the kinds of products that they're proud of, but they also want to have a really viable business model. So things we didn't think about. Then there's the classics like daycare, which you know lots about and have done a podcast with us on, and those kind of traditional things, those service things. But really, it's a testament to the people in Western Canada and their innovation and their ability to adapt the model. It's truly inspiring.
Excellent. Marc-Andre, you want to?
Yeah, so this was great. Thank you so much.